Hi, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing a review of Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I read this book about 2.5 years ago and I definitely want to break down my mixed feelings on it, so check out the timestamps below if you wish to skip ahead. Okay, so with this book, I don't think that there's anything particularly wrong in terms of what Leigh Bardugo herself did with it. I think that what my issue with it is that I think that there are some major structural issues that really should have been ironed out right at the beginning of the editing process. The pacing drags. Sometimes some things are not really fleshed out because there's so much more structural time given to other parts of the book that made the book really just kind of drag and just kind of not have a very clear focus. So my issues with this book isn't necessarily with Leigh Bardugo. Really, it's just kind of mostly the structural issue. Because to start, this book is a split between two POVs. One is our main character, Alex, and the other main character is a male POV. His name is Darlington. There are some things that happen with our male protagonist, Darlington, that kind of has Alex, our female protagonist, on edge. Alex is having feelings of guilt and perhaps a little bit of dread about our male POV coming back into the picture. So his POV throughout this book, which is primarily flashbacks and kind of setting up his backstory, I thought those might serve a purpose in kind of building up suspense to the finale, and perhaps that's where we're going to end on a cliffhanger. But unfortunately, this male POV is just kind of inserted randomly throughout this book. It served nothing in the end. He was not in the finale. He did not really give us much in the finale, and I was incredibly frustrated by that by the end, because I was like, why do we even need to have this male character in here if he wasn't going to serve any other sort of purpose? Why do we need to get to know him already? And to some extent that really kind of made our female protagonist like not very important either. I feel like there should have been so much more time spent on getting to know our female protagonist and getting to know her motivations, because she is the main character of this book. Unfortunately, I actually came to enjoy the male protagonist more in this book, and as a result, I kind of didn't really care that much about the female character. And as a result, I was not satisfied with either POV, because this male POV, I liked his character, I liked his backstory, yet I did feel like his character was incredibly unnecessary throughout this book. He did not need to be here in this book. I think that Leigh Bardugo's editor kind of needed to ask Leigh Bardugo, hey, why do you have this male protagonist POV in here? It's good to mention him in passing, it's good to mention his name, it's good to maybe set up a little bit of his character, but why are his backstory moments here, like his childhood moments, like what does that serve in this book? There are a lot of other issues that I had with this book, but I think that the main issue I had was that I didn't really get to know our female protagonist. This book takes so much time setting up backstories, whether it is for our female protagonist or our male protagonist. Either way, I didn't feel like I got to really know these characters in the present. The other biggest issue is that this book is intended to be actually a murder mystery. Now, this murder mystery is actually presented right at the beginning, and to be fair, I guess I should have maybe given it more serious thought, but to be totally honest with you, I don't feel like Leigh Bardugo did a really good job of emphasizing to me how important this murder mystery would be. For the first half of this book, I was wondering what the conflict of this book was. There was so much backstory being set up. There weren't that many present events going on. This murder mystery only really kicks in the middle of the book. As a result, when it came to the murder mystery, I was not invested at all. I did not even give it a second thought. At the beginning, I was really just thinking of, okay, so here's a murder that happened. I guess there's something going on campus. But then at the same time, I thought it was kind of there for aesthetic. Like, I know that sounds bad, but I thought that it was just kind of meant to set up the darkness of Alex's life. So I was pretty surprised when that suddenly kicked back in right in the middle of the story, because I didn't really get the sense that it was supposed to be a murder mystery, and I didn't really, it kind of felt like it was added as an after effect or an afterthought. So the two main structural issues I had with this book obviously would be that, the POV switch between our female and male protagonist. Our male protagonist is really unnecessary in this very first book. He could have had a little bit of setup, his few scenes with the female protagonist. That's fine, but getting his entire life backstory in this book. I didn't understand why we got that in retrospect. He was my favorite character, but it's exactly like, you know, Harry Potter, like the Crimes of Grindelwald with Dumbledore. Dumbledore was so unnecessary in the Crimes of Grindelwald, and yet he was my favorite character in Crimes of Grindelwald. And that's exactly my feeling with Darlington in Ninth House. Darlington was my favorite character, but he was so unnecessary to this very first book, and that's one of the major structural issues that this book has. The other major structural issue that this book has would be the murder mystery not kicking in properly right from the beginning, or it not being addressed that well, in my opinion. I feel like it just kind of sneaked back into the plot, and I was like, okay, is that supposed to be the main plot? Because for that very first half of the book, I was not very sure what the main plot of this book was supposed to be. The other little nitpicks that I have with this book would be the I guess the trauma porn. I don't really want to say it that way, because I do feel for Alex's struggles, she has just like a lot of emotional baggage, and I don't want to undermine that in any way. But at some time, if her personality or if her character is simply being defined by her trauma, then to me that kind of is trauma porn. Her personality was not really present for me because there was so much time spent on flashbacks and her wallowing in those past traumas that I didn't really get a proper sense of her personality in the present. I didn't fully understand her motivations or her goals in the present. And, you know, I'm not saying that she needs to have a future goal. If her main motivation at the moment is survival, that's completely fine. But the author at least needs to spend a lot more time in the present with our female protagonist and letting us know what her character is. I didn't really get a good sense of her personality. I think that's kind of where the main issue is. She seems very practical, and that's great, but I just don't really see her interacting a lot with other characters. We don't really see her having like dialogue. She just wallows a lot in her past, which I think this might sound a little bit weird, but that's why she felt a lot like Alina from Shadow and Bone trilogy. In the Shadow and Bone trilogy, like Alina, the main character, she was just kind of wallowing, and there's like a war going on. It's like she's wallowing in her romantic issues rather than the war issues. That was what made that character not feel as urgent or as like relevant to that book. And Alex, to some extent, she kind of had the same issue. She wallows a lot in this book. And as a result, I didn't really feel a lot for her character. And I don't think that it's the issue of Alex. I think it's an issue of there being so many flashbacks that I was getting the message that her past is more important to her than her present or her future. Again, that's not what Leigh Bardugo was going for, I'm sure, but that's kind of the message I was getting. So I don't think that there's anything particularly wrong that Leigh Bardugo did. It's just that there needed to be way more time spent on this female character, on Alex. Unfortunately, there was a lot of time spent on flashbacks. There was a lot of time spent on the male POV. And overall, that made the entire book feel like it was dragging its feet. And it was just wallowing in the depression and just the traumas. And that's kind of where I feel like it is kind of trauma porn. A lot of the trauma and the darkness that we see, it's not very relevant to what's going on right now. And it's more related to the backstories. So yeah, in summary, the problems with this book is that it wallows a lot in just like unnecessary emotional baggage. I'm not calling those emotional baggages unnecessary or like unimportant, but I'm just saying if our female protagonist is simply being defined only by her struggles and her traumas, then I don't think that's really good. Those graphic details were not necessarily relevant to the plot that's going on right now. Number two, that kind of made our female protagonist, we didn't get a great sense of her personality. The third thing is the structural issue of having this male POV intrude upon our female protagonist POV just kind of randomly, and he's not even relevant to the finale. So that's where I couldn't really get past his involvement in this book. If he had simply come into the finale and just kind of made a big splash, then I could have understood, but he didn't even come back in the finale, so I didn't really understand why he was there. As for some of the more positive things, again, obviously it's the Leigh Bardugo's prose. Her prose is fantastic, her exposition is great, her world building is solid. Her characters, again, are wallowing a lot, but they're not annoying by any means. You do feel for them in certain regards. It's just, you know, the structural issues right at the beginning of the book. I feel like Leigh Bardugo ended up focusing or prioritizing the unimportant stuff a lot before focusing on what's actually important. Like, obviously the murder mystery should have been given more priority if that was going to be the main plot line. Alex's personality obviously should have been prioritized more because the male POV is very unnecessary in my opinion. Obviously what we got out of our female protagonist is fine too, but I just needed way more out of her. On top of that, I did feel like the finale was a little bit predictable. There's like a villain reveal and I'm like, that's kind of predictable in my opinion, because there were not enough characters throughout this book that were complex, or there were not enough red herrings for the murder mystery. There were not enough red herrings for there to be for the culprit, I suppose. This book spends a lot of time wallowing and not giving us enough red herrings, or not enough time distracting us or trying to like have this sort of murder mystery going on. So as a result, the villain reveal in my opinion was rather predictable. As for some of the takeaways and like the morals of this book, I did feel like they were a little bit ham-fisted as well. I get it relates back to Alex's struggles and her being taken advantage of throughout her life, and I completely understand that. But at the same time, I just didn't feel like this murder mystery was enough of a anchor throughout this book for the moral takeaway to be what it was. It just kind of felt like very preachy and just kind of random, and I don't know. I didn't feel like the murder mystery was set up that well. I didn't feel like Alex was set up that well. She was just being defined by her traumas. And as a result, the preachy messages that, you know, the villain reveal kind of brings along with that, it's fine, but there was just a lot of work needed to be done on this book. I think that this book needed a lot of like overhauls, and it's not even Leigh Bardugo's fault in terms of the execution, because I think her writing is fantastic as usual. There's a lot of details about Yale. By the way, this book is set in Yale, and the author graduated from Yale as well, so you can tell that she knows the campus very, very well. Her expositions are great. Her characters are not annoying. Like, look, when it comes to the Shadow and Bone trilogy, which is the author's very first book, a lot of people think that the Shadow and Bone trilogy really sucks because, you know, they think that the characters suck or they're annoying. And I'm like, they're not annoying. It's just that they're not good at prioritizing what's important. Like, there's this war going on, and yet these characters are just kind of fussing about their romantic details, and that's kind of what makes it seem annoying. But if you really look at it technically, the characters themselves aren't annoying. It's just that they can't prioritize, and they just don't know how to get their personal baggage out of the way to focus on the task at hand. And this book kind of has that very similar problem of Alex wallowing a lot in her emotional baggage. We don't see her being forced to put down her emotional baggage long enough for us to know her personality or know her grit. And as a result, there's not much I can take away from this book. So yeah, I don't know if that was a helpful review. I'm just saying that this book is not bad. It's really difficult for me to say it's bad because I think that it's just the Leigh Bardugo focused a lot on what's unimportant first rather than what is important. What we got of the things that were important were fine. It's just there were other facets that need to be explored more, in my opinion, and we just never got enough of that. Okay, now I'm going to go into the spoiler discussion. I definitely will be spoiling some things, but you know, you can stick around if you want to just kind of hear what the spoilers are. I'm not exactly sure if you're going to be able to really know what I mean by these spoilers, so you can stick around if you want to hear the discussion. Okay, so first spoiler, as Alex's counselor being the villain. I was kind of suspecting that with her because there were not enough characters throughout this book to be red herrings. She was very much a mustache twirling villain. She just kind of felt like a throwaway character. I think that she could have had a lot more complexity considering she was, you know, much older than we expected her to be, but she just kind of dies, and I was like, okay, that's kind of anticlimactic. Oh yeah, Alex's whole preachy message to the villain about how, oh, it's because of people like you who take advantage of helpless girls like me. She's talking about how like the elites basically take advantage of people who need their help. Instead of offering their help in a constructive way, they decide to kind of twist situations to their advantage. And that's basically what the villain did to a lot of other girls. And Alex, having been in that place before, she's basically saying, oh, okay, like it's because of people like you. And it's just like, yeah, that's true. But at the same time, it's like, I guess I just never really got that strong sense of that moral. The villain reveal, it does relate back to Alex's traumas, but at the same time, I never really digested Alex as a female character who's like well-rounded, because she was again being defined by her traumas and her emotional baggage, because I didn't really believe in Alex that much as a character, and the villain reveal was just kind of like bleh. I think I guess that's where the messages felt a little bit preachy. I'm not saying that they're supposed to be preachy, or I'm not saying that the messages are bad. I think the messages are fantastic. I'm just saying that it didn't feel executed that well. The other issue obviously is the Darlington POVs. He was my favorite character. Again, I think that he's a really nice character who's trying to move past his emotional baggage from his childhood and whatnot, and I really respected him for that. That's kind of where I liked Darlington and didn't really love Alex, because while Alex is shown to be trying to move past her emotional baggage, at the same time there were just so many flashbacks that tonally it kind of felt like she was wallowing in those flashbacks. She wasn't, but that's the subtle messages I was getting out of this book. Whereas Darlington, I feel like he was trying to move past his emotional baggage from his childhood, and I really respected him for that. The problem with Darlington, though, is that he is not necessary in this first book. I thought that he was going to come back at the end. You know, there's going to be like this oh shit moment where Alex is forced to confront Darlington. The reveal of why Alex is feeling so guilty about Darlington. Alex is feeling guilty about Darlington because she thinks that she should have or could have saved him before he got sucked into the portal. But I suppose my thing is, like, survival's guilt isn't enough to feel that guilty. Alex was like really ragging on herself for doing something really horrible, and I'm like, okay, so what did she do? I thought that she did something actually horrible, as like maybe pushing Darlington into the portal. That was my expectation, but the only thing that it turned out to be was that she feels like she could have saved him in some way, or she should have acted, or maybe she just had this moment of hesitation, survivor's guilt, and I get that, but at the same time, it's not enough for her to feel like that guilty. So there were two reveals that I think really kind of could have fixed this book for me. Number one, that maybe if we had seen an actual really dark side to Alex, and like seen her actually push Darlington into the portal, or maybe if there was actually something she could have done to save him, like, and she just doesn't. Because again, the biggest problem I had with Alex throughout this book is that she's a victim. Constantly. She has a lot of emotional baggage, she has a lot of trauma, and she is a victim. Completely understand that. But in almost every single situation throughout this book, she's never shown to have a dark side. She keeps on saying that she has a dark side to her, and she has like really things that she wants to hide, but I did feel like she didn't really have anything to hide that was particularly like embarrassing. Yes, she might have a past that she just doesn't want to talk about, and that's fine, but at the same time, all the way from her beginning of her childhood, she was bullied. She was just like an outcast because she could see ghosts. Also, the fact that she was sexually molested by a ghost and like physically abused by her boyfriend, who was like way older than her. She was constantly manipulated by people around her, and people should have been protecting her from a very young age, and yet she never had that protection. So it wouldn't make sense for her to really blame herself that much for that. Alex, the way that she is presented in this book, she has enough self-awareness to realize that those things aren't her fault. So I didn't really understand why she was constantly saying, oh, like, I have a dark past, or like, I have things that I want to hide, like, I have a dark side to me. It's like, sure, you have dark past, but you don't really have a dark side to you. You are a perfectly normal girl. You have perfectly normal morals. It's just that people around you manipulate you. That's not her fault, right? It's not her fault that she had to go through the struggles that she did. So for me, she was constantly like saying, oh, like, I have a dark side to me. It's like, no, she doesn't really have a dark side. She's not that hardcore, if you really ask me. That's kind of where this book falls into trauma porn for me, because if this trauma had somehow contributed to Alex making really bad decisions in her present, if we actually see Alex doing something really kind of questionable throughout this book, then I could be like, that's good, you know, that is relevant to her character right now. It wouldn't have looked like the author was trying to make Alex look like a victim. It only would have served more as an explanation for why she's done something kind of shitty in the present. Or, you know, if the big reveal about Darlington had been that Alex actually pushed him into the portal because maybe he found out something about her past that she didn't want him to know, and she feels really bad about it right afterwards, that would have been like, okay, so she did something really bad in the present, but look at her past and how horrible things like has happened happened to her for her to kind of make these bad decisions right now. Presenting Alex as a morally gray heroine, that could have fixed a lot of this book's issues for me, because then all of this victim, things that she went through in the past and all this trauma, then all these like flashbacks, it is necessary to explain why she's doing horrible things in the present. But again, because there was nothing particularly bad that Alex is doing in the present, I did feel like all of her past traumas just being laid out before us. It's just like, it just simply felt like, please feel bad for Alex. That's all it felt like. It just felt very unnecessary to go into that amount of detail, and like, you know what I'm saying?
Hi, I'm editing this right now, and I completely forgot to mention the second way that this book could have been saved. Second way I thought that this book could have been saved was in regards to Helly. Completely forgot to mention Helly for some reason. Don't ask me why. But Helly's death. The twist about Helly's death was very anticlimactic in my opinion, because I did feel like it was not an instance where we can say that Alex is the culprit or that she's guilty or she has a dark side, because it's revealed that Helly basically, sacrificed her for Alex. She gets drug overdosed and dies in the process. And once again, Alex is free of guilt. Alex feels survivor's guilt, but that's not the same thing as being guilty in my opinion. So the second way that this book could have been saved was if it is shown that Alex maybe had a hand in Helly's death, not purposefully, but maybe she did something questionable and then, she accidentally led to Helly's death. That would have been a great twist that could have saved Alex's character for me. But the only questionable thing that Alex does in that scene is that she basically kills Helly's killers, which kind of makes her this herald of justice. Like, I'm not condoning killing people or anything like that, but I did feel very anticlimactic about Helly's death, because I think that Leigh Bardugo was trying to focus on Alex killing Helly's killers as the twist, but it's like, I think it would have been better if Alex was shown to have led to Helly's death accidentally and then felt really, really guilty about it, because then it would have made her much less of a victim and a little bit more of like a conflicted or complex character, because there's a difference between survivor's guilt and just being straight up guilty, like feeling guilt or feeling responsible for someone's death. And I just needed more of that for Alex's character. She's just always the victim, and she's never shown to do anything really questionable. Anytime that she does do something questionable, it is when someone else did something first questionable, like in regards to her friend getting raped by a guy. She makes that guy eat shit. Obviously that's questionable, but it's like, she's delivering justice. And even in regards to like Helly and her killers, Alex basically kills Helly's killers, and obviously that's wrong, but she's again delivering justice. So I needed more instances where Alex is doing something wrong. That's what I needed more out of that character. So I did feel like the second way that this book could have been saved was if Alex accidentally led to Helly's death.
Okay, so I guess I should discuss some of the more graphic things throughout this book that were a little bit more controversial. Trigger warning, I'm going to talk about rape. That issue about, Alex being nearly raped by a ghost. Yeah, again, trauma porn. I feel like that falls into trauma porn for me a little bit, because it's just like that little detail about her nearly being raped. It needed to be kind of presented in a relevant way, where it's just not like, hey, look at her past traumas. If Alex is nearly being raped by somebody right now, and maybe if, she gets like PTSD from that, then I think that's fine. Unfortunately, some of these details are just kind of presented randomly without any context to the present. Another point in this book that I just felt very grossed out was Alex makes a guy who's sexually assaulted one of her friends, or maybe raped, I'm not exactly sure. She basically gets revenge on this guy, and she kind of makes him eat shit. Literally. Again, that's fine. But I guess my issue with the scene is that, again, I just never really got a good sense of Alex's life in the present and her friendships with certain other characters. There were just not enough characters throughout this book for me to feel like, oh, this is Alex's best friend, or this is another one of her acquaintances. Just not enough characters that feel close enough to Alex. And so when she goes out of her way to get revenge for her friend, it kind of feels like a sharp left turn in order to lead to this really gross moment of this guy eating shit. Again, I'm not saying that I have an issue with that scene being there. I guess I just have an issue with how it was presented, or how it just came about. Because again, I just never did feel like Alex had enough of a bond with her friends to that extent that we needed to take a sharp left turn into her getting revenge for one of her friends. It's not that out of place, to be totally honest, or like to be totally fair, but at the same time, it did feel like that was kind of a random moment. Yeah, just a lot of the graphic things that happened throughout this book. I don't think that them being in this book is an issue particularly. I don't believe in censoring things necessarily if that's what the author believes like wants to happen. But at the same time, a lot of the graphic things that happen throughout this book definitely do feel random. Lastly, before I end this review, I guess I just want to discuss something about this book. Going into this book, I had a lot of nervousness. Look, I had read the Six Crows duology first, was incredibly in love with it, and then I went to her Shadow and Bone trilogy, knowing that I've heard that people think that Shadow and Bone trilogy is like not as good as Six of Crows. So going into that trilogy, I was like, okay, I'm gonna keep an open mind, but I'm probably not gonna like it. Sure enough, I did like the first book actually. I liked the characters. The second and third books were a mess though. Again, a lot of people say that the Shadow and Bone trilogy characters are bad or whatever, and it's just like, they're not bad. It's just that they don't know how to put aside their baggage to focus on what's going on right now. That's why I loved the Six of Crows duology. The Six of Crows duology, every single one of those characters have immense baggage, and yet they all have to band together and like put aside their personal baggages and just like really focus on the task at hand in order to survive. So for me, I kind of knew where the author's weaknesses were going into Ninth House. I was wondering, is she gonna go down the Shadow and Bone route, or is she gonna go down the Six of Crows duology route? I feel like with Ninth House, she kind of did both. Six of Crows, like, it's very dark, right? It's a lot darker than Shadow and Bone, and there's a lot of dark things that happen to the characters, and I think that's kind of what carried over into Ninth House to like the tenfold. Leigh Bardugo did make Ninth House a lot darker than Six of Crows, so that's what she carried over. And she also did carry over a lot of the practicalness of the characters. Alex did feel very much practical. She did feel very much like self-aware. She is trying to move past her traumas, but I guess it's, again, the flashbacks are kind of sending the contradictory message that Alex is trying to get past her, emotional baggage. So again, the structural issues are the issues, not necessarily the characters themselves. Very much like with Shadow and Bone trilogy, Elena is fine, her character is fine, but the structure of Shadow and Bone, where it doesn't really have a clear-cut plot, or the war is not the first-hand thing on your mind, despite it being the biggest issue of that book. It's sending the contradictory message that Elena is not prioritizing certain things. So contradictory messages with the Shadow and Bone trilogy, I did feel like carried over into Ninth House. I was like, Alex reminds me a lot of Elena. She's wallowing in her emotional baggage, and because of those flashbacks where the author is just dragging her feet, refusing to get to the present issues at hand, which would be the murder mystery, I suppose, it kind of made Alex look like she's not able to get past her traumas. I think that with Six of Crows duology, where the characters are wallowing, they wallow at appropriate moments. It's not just randomly inserted into random moments. They might be waiting for their target and they're like in hiding, and they fall back into their past, or they start wallowing, or they start thinking about their dark past. And that's how information is presented. It's never like an entire chapter unto itself. Every single time that trauma or like emotional baggage is presented in Six of Crows, it's also always presented in relevant moments. That was something that I really needed more out of Ninth House. Ninth House needed to just kind of present its information a lot more in a natural way, rather than exposition dumping on the reader, and also not doing the shock factor thing for the sake of shock factor. All of that really could have been fixed either if Darlington comes back with that crazy revelation that Alex was the one who had pushed him into the portal in that very first place, because then all the victim painting of Alex throughout this book, making her out to be like a saint, it would have made so much sense, because by the end we look at her in a completely new way and we are like questioning her. It could have actually alleviated a lot of the issues of this book for me, as I said before, because I think that the execution of a lot of the other things in this book are fine. I like the characters just fine. The traumas are fine. The murder mystery could have been fine. It's just that the urgency is not there. It makes the book meander a lot. It makes this book feel like very messy, and that was my major issue with this book. I didn't hate it. I just had very mixed feelings on it, because honestly, to be totally honest with you, I think that I would have really enjoyed this book a lot more if it was focused more on Alex and her college life. I think that this was so much more about the paranormal stuff that there was no point for it to be set at Yale. Despite Leigh Bardugo being really good at world building and detailing what Yale is like, at the same time, I didn't really get the sense that this was Yale, simply because it didn't really feel that much like college life. We didn't really see Alex going to her classes that much. We didn't really see her interacting with her peers or her professors, or her going to certain like events at college. She's so much more about the supernatural shit that I didn't really see any point for it to be said at Yale. And I think that was one of my biggest expectations that was like shattered right from the beginning. If this book had been a lot more about the college things, with Alex starting at college like a lot more, or integrating herself into college and trying to make friends, trying to, you know, get to know her classes and her professors, if that had been more of the focus at the start of this book, then I think that I could have related a lot more strongly to her. She's not like the other elite students, basically. She's not from a rich background. She's not like that super smart. And she's had a very, very troubled past. And for her to kind of have this culture shock of coming to Yale, where she's faced with a lot of different sort of values or very different sort of people, I kind of wanted her to kind of bash heads a little bit, but I just didn't feel like there was enough of that contrast between her and the other students. And that's why I probably won't be going into the second book, because I didn't feel like this was a very college-like setting. I think that I could have liked this book a lot more if I got more of that college setting taste. And yeah, I just never really did. Would I recommend this book? Oh yeah, I should probably get to that. You know, if you have the energy to wade through a little bit of like exposition and a lot of like darkness and a lot of trauma stuff, then I think that the ending could give you some sort of payout. I think that the ending definitely did bring it back around a lot more like better. Obviously it didn't go the way that I hoped it would, but it ends on a much stronger note than it started. And considering it's the very first book, I think that it has potential to, you know, improve. It's not like Crimes of Grindelwald, right? Recent Harry Potter fans would definitely know that Crimes of Grindelwald completely ruined any chance for there to be any sequels to the Crimes of Grindelwald. It was just so bad and so messy and so completely off the rails that there was just no chance for anything to be followed up after that. Ninth House, though, I think it does have great potential to go somewhere better. But if you're someone like me who just doesn't really love these crime thriller novels, and also if you understand what I'm saying about the Shadow and Bone trilogy and how it tends to wallow, Ninth House is kind of that feeling. So, you know, it's your call. I would not recommend this book if you're just reading it because it's a Leigh Bardugo novel, by the way. There are a lot of graphic things that happen. There's a lot of triggering things that might happen. So yeah, don't go into this book if you're just a fan of Shadow and Bone and Six of Crows duology, because it is completely different from what those books were. Those books might have been a little bit on the darker side for YA, but this is a full-on adult novel. So yeah, thanks for watching this review. Let me know if you're going to plan to go on into the second book, because I personally have very mixed feelings on it, because I think that the execution is there. It's just that a lot of context issues and subtext issues and tonal issues due to the structural issues of this book kind of marred this book a lot, and I think that it kind of needed to be overhauled a lot before being published. That's basically my thoughts on it. I think it just went wrong right at the beginning of the editing process. So let me know what your thoughts are on this book, and good night. Toodles.